A lot of people are convinced that swans are extremely dangerous animals, but despite their aggressiveness, they only weigh about 15 kilos and have fragile, hollow bones. Everyone who's told you they can break your arm has fallen for an urban legend. Turns out people are suckers for a propaganda. In episode 206, I described a broad theory that departs from our usual notion of reasoning as a solitary activity, something that you do by yourself in a comfortable armchair. The argumentative theory of human reason, which posits that human rationality evolved as a tool to win debates in groups, and cultural evolution theory, which suggests that cultural practices often develop as mnemonic aids for hard-won survival strategies, both point at a similar idea. We shouldn't be surprised that individual thinkers are prone to bias and systematic errors of judgment because our entire capacity for reasoning has evolved to function in a social and cultural context. If you lock someone in a closet and ask them to figure something out, no matter how brilliant they are or how many blog posts about confirmation bias they've read, we shouldn't be surprised if they screw up and emerge with the wrong answer. On the other hand, if they can talk their ideas out in a group and consult a range of opinions, they're likely to get somewhere in the ballpark of the truth. If the group they're in discussion with happens to be a community of experts who are collecting data, vetting theories, and thinking hard about the same problem, that's called scientific inquiry, and it's our guiding light for empirical truth. We do all our best thinking in groups. Individuals sometimes venture off into the unknown by themselves, but the true test of the value of their ideas isn't whether they're convinced, it's whether their reasons and arguments about what they've discovered are convincing enough to move a substantial number of their peers, to be absorbed into the body of cultural knowledge and spread by others. That notion, the intrinsically social character of reasoning, has been instrumental for how I've thought about the world and my place in it, which is why this essay by Henry Farrell hit me like a freight train. You're undoubtedly familiar with a widespread concern about social media and misinformation. So much of what we know, or think we know, is blasted at us through a handful of large platforms. That technology makes it trivial for malicious individuals and organizations to mass-produce lies and propaganda that can convince millions of credulous users of just about anything, even absurdities that fall apart if you think about them for 2 seconds. Social media platforms don't have any incentive to devote resources to combat these efforts, so long as someone's paying for them, and have mostly shrugged apathetically as they collapse into churning engines of dis and misinformation. Therefore, we need better mechanisms of vetting and punishment for anyone who would dare lie on the internet or propagate those lies, and we need to educate the masses how to check sources and do their own research, which incidentally has become a euphemism for vaccine skepticism. For Farrell, this narrative is stymied by an implicit assumption that society is best understood as a collection of atomized individuals, evaluating everything they read online in a vacuum, and deciding for themselves, rightly or wrongly, whether or not to believe it. Very few people have the time, the resources, or the expertise to analyze the shotgun blast of data presented by the internet. We invariably rely on the wisdom of others to get us somewhere in the ballpark of truth, and according to Farrell, that is the source of the real danger posed by social media. Biased misrepresentation of the landscape of opinions. He draws a fascinating analogy to, stick with me here, online pornography, which seems to have become bizarrely laser-focused on a few niche kinks. These kinks don't represent the most popular or most frequently searched videos, but are targeting a small population of so-called whale customers, people who are very online, very interested in pornography, and willing to spend a lot of money to satisfy their particular hankerings. Chasing those whales, the entire online pornography industry has contorted itself around those hankerings. The result being that now, if you visit the front page of any pornography website, you're likely to see a selection of content that really isn't intended to appeal to the vast majority of the porn viewing population. If you happen to be a teenager who's just starting to explore your sexuality by doing some research, you might come away with a wildly distorted notion of what most people tend to like in the bedroom or laundry room. For Farrell, the same basic mechanism is at work in social media. When we open Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, we aren't seeing a representative cross-section of the opinions and thoughts of our peers. We're seeing whatever posts the algorithm has determined are most lucrative to blast into our faces, optimizing for some combination of time spent on the platform, engagement, likelihood of clicking through to an advertiser, all that stuff. If you happen to be a voter who's just starting to explore your political opinions by doing some research, you might come away with a wildly distorted notion of what most people think of as reasonable political positions. Importantly, we're not talking about fake news or echo chambers, though those can certainly be problems. We're talking about a global process of curation, sometimes intentionally, sometimes by pressures of the business model, to show you a window of opinions that appeal exclusively to the most profitable, most online people, and hopefully to turn you into one. Farrell's focus on how these platforms misrepresent the public rather than the facts has just lodged itself in my brain and changed my entire experience of not just social media, but media in general. TV, movies, news, everything that has to compete for your attention in this frantic online arena dominated by ad revenue. A lot of people worry about the so-called Overton window, the range of political positions that a society generally agrees to be reasonable. Journalists generally would not quote some weirdo who wants to restore the Habsburg dynasty when writing a news story about local elections in Seattle, because that opinion is outside the Overton window. It's cuckoo bananas, not worth considering, except maybe as an amusing oddity. It's absolutely true that this exercise of selective attention and framing of news stories does a lot to subtly influence what sorts of opinions we might consider mainstream and worthy of consideration. But there are limits to that effect. An article represents a publicly available text that will be evaluated according to many diverse viewpoints in a wider social context over many years, and will ultimately add or subtract from the public esteem for the newspaper. But the curatorial mechanisms at work on social media have no need to be subtle. They aren't just presenting an idea and asking their readers to form a collective opinion about it. They're manufacturing a collective opinion, drawing from an infinite well of diverse viewpoints to fully populate the social context you'd use as a yardstick to tell if some idea is crazy or plausible or just common sense, in the hopes that you might become a whale who they can farm continuously for engagement. Again, this isn't indicative of some widespread failure to vet information or check sources. Our instincts for skepticism are downstream of the social consensus we take as a starting point for what's plausible and what needs to be checked. It's the difference between deciding which of your friends you can trust most to know the history of space exploration and replacing your entire friend group with people who believe the moon landing was faked. Now, you might be thinking, is this really such a big deal? Propaganda and censorship have existed since time immemorial. Sure, the formats change, but haven't malicious actors cultivated a one-sided narrative about how great they are for centuries in an attempt to create this very situation? Sure, but the efficacy of those efforts has always been circumscribed by the society's awareness of them. Regimes which expend a ton of resources policing public opinion often end up undermining their authority by revealing just how fragile they imagine their position to be, as though a single voice of dissent might be enough to bring the whole operation tumbling down. The most effective propaganda efforts tend to sneak the proselytizing in under the radar, smuggling bias into assumptions, paying trite lip service to being fair and balanced, or concealing the intent of the propaganda by altering its format to make it look like something else. Native advertising is a great example of this sort of strategy. Advertisements disguised as social media posts or news articles blend into their surroundings, so it's not immediately apparent to the audience that someone's trying to sell them something. The same goes for news that subtly alternates between inflammatory opinion pieces, sponsored ad reads, and news segments. If you're not paying close attention, it's not clear where the facts end and the shilling begins, and that ambiguity makes it easier to sell you products or political rhetoric. Under that rubric, the slanted landscape of public opinion portrayed by social media seems like an exceptionally subtle and effective instrument to shape public opinion. These are all real posts written by real people who really believe the things they're saying, or at least have no hang-ups whatsoever about bullshitting for attention. Without some other point of reference for the median worldview, there wouldn't be the slightest hint that your feed is actually a grotesque parade of terminally online posters, that middle-of-the-road ideas had been ruthlessly culled from the picture of society displayed there in the name of increased user engagement and ad revenue. Worse yet, when someone has been led to believe that's just what public discourse looks like, they're likely to perceive anyone who hasn't been trained in the same fashion as uninformed, rather than not terminally online. What do you mean you've never heard of Pizzagate, the single most important world event of 2016? You must live in a cave or something. In that light, misinformation and disinformation are small potatoes compared to the power of a skewed picture of public opinion. Facts are easy to come by on the internet, but so are cherry-picked justifications for almost any idea. If narratives like QAnon or incel culture happen to flatter your preconceptions about the world and how it works, social media companies are thrilled at the opportunity to return to them again and again, implying that they're reasonable, even popular beliefs, deserving your engagement. And you'll easily find an ample supply of supporting evidence, if you ever need it, to defend those beliefs against anyone who just doesn't understand how out of the loop they are. Even if you know better, it sure seems like everyone else in your feed who posts more than once a week has totally bought these wild stories, and it makes sense to maintain a plausible agnosticism in public, as if you don't think they're crazy. No need to alienate all your extremely online friends by coming right out and saying, yeah, this is bullshit. Unsurprisingly, Farrell argues this is not a recipe for a functional democratic public. Consider, 2/3 of the US electorate has at least one algorithm in their pockets continuously misrepresenting public consensus to drive people to be more online. That algorithm has absorbed and replaced almost all public discourse and debate, skewing everyone's understanding of the coalitions we belong to, who our political enemies are, what they believe, what it even looks like to do politics, and so on. It more or less dictates our understanding of the political landscape we occupy and dominates the mechanisms of social rationality we rely on to interpret, process, and respond meaningfully to political issues. This raises an obvious question. Are we cooked, chat? Farrell defines the problem remarkably well, and he notes some important questions that it raises for the future, but he falls short of recommending any course of action to combat these issues. There's some obvious low-hanging fruit. Reducing our exposure to social media and increasing our involvement with real-world communities won't stop these algorithms from driving everyone around us slowly crazy, but it does give us a chance to experience a range of opinions that isn't totally dictated by the logic of the algorithm. Being brave and voicing your dissent in real-life situations where someone's clearly off their rocker can also help to break up their illusion of consensus. And if someone else is being brave like this, and you think they're right, it's worth the effort to go out of your way to back them up. But more importantly, this is a problem of systems and incentives. And while heroic individual action can make a difference, it's not sufficient to turn the tide on its own. Even if you were to toss your smartphone into a garbage disposal and go live in a shack in the woods somewhere, the people running the world are glued to their phones, and their decisions are shaping things like the global climate, which is everyone's problem. To grapple with systems-level issues, you need some sort of coordinated effort with other people, working together to identify the mechanisms that create this funhouse mirror effect and finding ways to interrupt, redirect, or break them. The most obvious example of this is unions for tech workers. If the engineers that are constantly developing and maintaining Facebook can wield collective bargaining power, there's now another input to the corporate decision-making process besides what's profitable. That is, selling more ads. If union members are tired of arguing with increasingly unhinged relatives every Thanksgiving, they can make that issue legible to the company in a way it otherwise couldn't be. There are other ways to apply pressure, even if you don't work in tech. Calling and yelling at your representatives is cathartic, and can sometimes be an effective way to get some sort of legal attention on an issue. Cory Doctorow has long advocated common-sense interoperability legislation for social media. Simple laws requiring delivery of user-requested content first, rather than burying it under whatever crap the platform would like to shovel on you, and a right to exit, mandating some sort of API that allows users to leave a platform without totally abandoning their social networks. Interoperability would undermine the power of individual platforms to dictate what you see when you want to catch up with friends or watch a cute puppy video your mom sent you. There are also some smaller-scale community-level things you can do for friends and neighbors. Volunteering to help people set up ad blockers, like uBlock Origin, or the bandwidth-saving Pi-hole, won't just make you incredibly popular. It attacks the incentive structure that rewards social media companies for bending over backwards to capture our attention. Without ad revenue, getting someone addicted to your website just means paying extra for more bandwidth. Unfortunately, These companies have been optimizing their ability to create these Truman Show bubbles of public opinion for decades, and none of these methods are going to be enough to undo the harm they've already caused to the fabric of both social rationality and democracy. But now that you're aware of how these pressures are conspiring to shape us all into little posting goblins who learn, think, and express ourselves according to some warped advertiser-friendly version of reality, you might be able to find your own ways to fight back. Thank you very much for watching. In the interest of practicing a little of what I preach here, I've disabled comments for this video, which the YouTube algorithm predictably hates. So, if you thought it was interesting or informative or helpful, please send it to someone you think might like it. If you'd care to chat with me or some of my incredibly thoughtful, well-read, patient, and stunningly attractive THUNK community members about it, feel free to join our cozy little Discord channel, or send me a message on patreon.com/thunkshow. Don't forget to blah, blah, subscribe, blah, share, and don't stop touching grass.